Well, to the U.S. election now, where the Trump team began this last weekend of campaigning, defending their candidate and condemning media coverage of a comment made by Donald Trump on the last day of October.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Now, Democrats have condemned the comment for using violent rhetoric, which Republicans say it was not. And for more, we're now joined by Luiza Savage, executive editor of Growth with Politico. Luiza, hello to you.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. So listen, people keep talking about October surprises. This comment comes on the last day of October. I'm wondering about reaction to it. What are you hearing?
Well, this is the moment where the candidates are trying to be making their final closing arguments to the voters. And the Trump campaign has just spent millions of dollars on ads that are focused on the economy and on the southern border, and saying that the Biden-Harris administration broke it and Trump could fix it. That's the message they're trying to focus on. And then along comes the candidate last night making these comments that have generated a ton of headlines. Some people read them and think that he's invoking a firing squad or calling for violence against Kamala Harris. I think it's also possible to read them as him saying, look, she should go to the worst situation in a war and see how she likes it. But certainly the Democrats are welcoming this. Their closing argument to voters, and the Harris campaign's closing argument, is we need to turn the page on the drama, on the violent rhetoric, et cetera. So this sort of plays into the message that they've been trying to make. Now, I will add that, as we've discussed on the show before, Trump is really trying to focus a message at young men. And part of his message to young men is, look, the other side, they're warmongers. They want to start wars. They're going to be sending you all into war. And, there have been people talking about a draft and so on. So this is, to me, consistent with the message he's trying to bring to that particular demographic. But with the overheated rhetoric, the violent language, I think it's completely detracting from the closing message that his campaign is trying to put out there in the swing states so close to the election. Well,
certainly his surrogates are trying very hard to tamp down any controversy around that remark, and essentially giving, as you say, the spin there that rather than a gun to Liz Cheney's head, what he's talking about is her not sending people to war. But you mentioned young men, and we've been talking about that demographic the last few weeks now. Historically, they are less likely to vote, though, as a demographic. Does that hold up this time around when you have social media influencers playing such a big role in the Trump campaign?
Well, I think it's so interesting, right, that both former President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, have spent so much time on these podcasts, going on Joe Rogan and all kinds of other shows, trying to show Donald Trump as a regular guy, right, like someone who you could hang out with, who's likable. And that seems to be resonating with a lot of male voters. However, it's unclear if those people will actually show up to vote. And in the early voting that we've seen so far, women voters and young women voters are showing up in larger numbers than expected. So it's really hard to read a lot into the early voting numbers, but certainly it's giving the Harris campaign some hope.
Gives them some hope. Talk to us then about the pressure that puts on the ground game, though, because when you look at the swing states, again, they're very tight within margins of error. How important is the ground game right now? What are you seeing in terms of ground game, trying to get voters out and making sure they don't miss Election Day?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting debate among prognosticators and pollsters whether the ground game has more impact or campaign ads. And, most people think that the ground game is important because the other side does it, and so you have to be there doing it. Now, the Democrats have more of a ground game than the Republicans. And the other interesting thing is, for years, Donald Trump has been discouraging his voters from voting early. He's doing less of that this year than last cycle. But so generally speaking, Democrats do vote more early, which is helpful because you lock in those votes, right? You don't have to worry whether they'll show up on Election Day. The question is, how many of those votes are simply cannibalizing votes they would otherwise get on Election Day? But you can be sure, Michael, that this weekend there'll be a big push on both sides, knocking on doors, trying to make sure that people get to their polling place. I know my phone has been exploding with text messages of all kinds relating to the election, and surely I'm not alone.
Yeah, and it's not just us trying to book an interview with you, I'm sure. So, listen, Luiza, as we are here in this last weekend of the campaign, what are you watching out for?
You know, I think obviously the swing states are really important, but I would also say, like, it's not just the presidential race, right? It's also the House and the Senate that are at stake here. And I think as we get closer to the election day, the presidency is still really tight. It's hard to know who will win. But most of the analysts that I talk to are expecting to see Republicans take the Senate. It'd be very hard for Democrats to win, just the way the map is this particular cycle. And the House is up for grabs. We might not know for days who wins the House, but there's some signs that Democrats have a good shot there. So it's going to be just a very interesting election. We might not know all the results for a couple days, possibly longer than that. So it's going to be a very long Tuesday night.
Okay. Well, luckily, I think Politico is hosting a party here in Ottawa. So
that's right. So I hope you'll show up. I've heard that a certain U.S. ambassador might show up.
Okay. Well, I'll be there looking for you. Luiza, thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Thanks.